I'm Charlie Coker, Executive Director of Asia Society Southern California. We are pleased to be in partnership with the Los Angeles Urban League for this evening's program, COVID-19 Education Divide. The program tonight will examine the disruption to higher education caused by the pandemic, including the displacement of its traditional model of in-person classes and a vibrant campus life for virtual coursework done at home. Our moderator for this evening is Jay Tucker. Jay is the Executive Director at the Center for Management of Enterprise in Media, Entertainment, and Sports at the University of California, Los Angeles, Anderson School. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jay. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Jay Tucker, and I'm pleased to be here with two incredible leaders in higher education, Vincent Price, president of Duke University, and Michael Rao, president of Virginia Commonwealth University and the VCU Health System. We're going to explore a number of topics that center around how the COVID pandemic impacted higher ed and how these institutions approach making the full educational experience available to all of their students, regardless of their backgrounds or individual circumstances. We're going to jump right into the conversation. So let me start with President Price. Vincent Price, hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm just going to introduce you to the rest of the folks out there. Vincent Price is the 10th president of Duke University, where he's also the Walter Hines Page Professor of Public Policy and Political Science in the Sanford School of Public Policy and Trinity College of Arts and Sciences. Welcome again, President Price. As we start off, I just want to remind those of you who have joined us that we're going to take questions from the audience throughout the conversation. We have, if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse down to the bottom, you'll see that there's a little Q&A button. So there you can ask questions that will get fed back to us, and we'll make sure that we work them into the talk. So President Price, for the benefit of the folks here, I think we've been through a very interesting year. Could you talk a little bit about how the past year impacted the university and your efforts?
Well, sure, Jay, and it's great to be with you, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. We have had to make a number of decisions along the way. It has been challenging, but we've always tried to keep several high-level goals in sight when we made decisions over these past 14, 15 months. The first was to maintain focus on our core missions of education, research, and service, and especially patient care, because through Duke Health, we do serve the needs of a large population of patients in our region. The second was always to follow the best available public health and medical guidance, and leveraging our schools of medicine and nursing and public policy and our clinicians in the health system, and drawing in particular on our Duke Human Vaccine Institute here on campus and our Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy in Washington. And the third was to ensure that all the choices we made were motivated by our institutional values of respect, mutual trust, inclusion, discovery, and excellence, and to be mindful always of the ways that our choices would impact our disadvantaged student, staff, and community members. So we made a decision in the spring when we suspended normal operations over our spring break that we would make extraordinary financial assistance available to students who were in need. We launched a $4 million student assistance fund that could provide for food and travel and temporary housing, technology support, and so on, and continue to rely on that fund as we work our way through the year. The second thing we did was work very hard to retain our employees by cutting salaries and benefits for our better compensated faculty and staff, rather than by laying people off, including our contract workers. We're the largest employer in Durham, our hometown, and we want to make sure that we did all we could to sustain the economy of the region. We also coordinated with the city and the county to help small businesses and nonprofit community organizations by seeding our Duke Durham Fund with an initial investment of $5 million for that purpose, and provide bridge funding wherever we could. We worked with the Durham Public Schools Foundation in a successful campaign for digital equity. It was actually launched pre-pandemic, but proved to be very, very helpful to our public schools. We launched a Duke Health COVID response fund to address the needs of patients and caregivers and area students, but also to accelerate our research into therapeutics and vaccines. And then we worked very hard to bring as many of our students back to campus as safely as possible, because we felt it was best for the students to be here in person, best for the community to have our students, frankly, here if we could do that safely. And so we worked over the summer to alter all of our living arrangements, our dining programs, our classroom instructional programs. And we lifted a very extensive testing program that had the capacity to gather 5,000 tests daily. And that allowed us to essentially operate all year long with our full complement of students, undergraduate and graduate students, living here in residence on our campus, with the exception of a couple of hundred undergraduates in the fall, and international students who were unable to make their way back to Durham. Most of our instruction, about 2/3 of our instruction was remote, but 1/3 of our instruction was delivered face-to-face. And again, we felt it was very important to be here on the campus. And I would have to say, in hindsight, it worked pretty well. It was definitely not the typical Duke year. It was not the typical Duke experience. Face masks, social distancing throughout, a much quieter sort of tone. But our first year class made it through their first year, bonded together as any first year class would, did it differently, and it called upon a lot of creativity, I'd say, from our students, our faculty, and our staff. So we're coming out of COVID, I feel, in pretty good shape as an institution. We've learned a lot. We've relied on a lot of teamwork. Final thing I'll say is we repurposed, all of us, to make things work. So one example, the isolation care team that took care of students who were in isolation or in quarantine, largely these were staff members in areas related to, for example, theater arts, where they couldn't put their normal time in doing the things they would typically do. They volunteered to step up and do other things. It was just extraordinary. So a difficult time for the community, but at the same time, I would say an experience that has bonded us as an institution and a university, I think, in marked ways.
So it sounds like, you figured out some of the key areas where you could actually make a positive impact and move things in the right direction over the course of the year. But the long list of initiatives that you just laid out, what I hear is working with lots and lots and lots of people. And in higher ed, sometimes that doesn't happen very quickly, but what you describe actually did happen very quickly at light speed by university standards. When you're talking about getting things rolled out by the end of the summer, can you talk a little bit about how you approached the breadth of the pandemic challenges and how you were able to kind of narrow the focus and kind of work on the most important things to make some of those milestones happen in a timely manner?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. We created 2 task forces, one called Team 2021, Strategy Team 2021, and the other Strategy Team 2030. So the first was focused just on how we could navigate through our operational needs and demands and make all those adjustments wherever we could, with an explicit charge, as I said, to pay attention to potential inequities that we might create in doing that, but also with an eye toward making changes that we might want to keep, trying to invest in adjustments that had more lasting value than just navigating through the pandemic. And that team, it stretched across the entire campus. It had a nucleus of fairly high-level decision makers, but they quickly built other teams to lift certain projects. We put together a faculty advisory group to help us, a modeling group, frankly, to help us make sense of the data we collected and to guide our testing program. We leaned very heavily on that group all year long. We had students advising us along the way in student affairs. We did work very closely with our community partners. So there was an attempt to mobilize as many different parties as we could. It's once we got the hang of operating remotely and learned through Zoom that Zoom is deficient in many respects as part of the educational venture, but it does allow you fairly rapidly to put a lot of people together. And so we were leveraging that. The other thing I'll say is we operate a joint venture campus in Kunshan, China, just about a half hour outside of Shanghai. And they started to experience these COVID challenges before they arrived at our doorstep. So we were mobilizing support to flip that curriculum online several months before we had to do it for the rest of Duke University. And it was an all hands operation to do that work at that remote campus, but we learned a lot in the process. So we actually went into the spring with a little bit of experience that we had gained from that project. We also, over the summer, activated our research enterprise well before we activated our educational enterprise, reactivated, I should say. And the experience of developing protocols that would allow our graduate students, our faculty, lab technicians, and others to get back into the labs and working productively gave us a base of experience. We tried out our symptom monitoring protocols. You know, we had a lot of test applications. When we brought student athletes back over the summer to begin practicing, again, you know, on a small scale, we had an opportunity to put into play all those protocols. None of these were without bumps in the road, but we acquired experience over time. And frankly, I don't think if we had gone into the fall semester and invited all of those returning undergraduates to come back to our dorms, absent that experience that we had acquired over the summer, I doubt we would have had the confidence to move forward in the way we did.
All right. With that, I want to bring in President Michael Rao. As president of Virginia Commonwealth University and the VCU health system, you have a pretty broad scope of responsibilities. First of all, thank you for joining us and welcome. I wanted to ask you a very similar question. Obviously, this past year has been a challenge for all of us. Each university has kind of handled it in its own way. You heard President Price kind of tease this, some of the challenges and opportunities on the medical side. Could you just talk a little bit about how the pandemic impacted your thinking and what was going on at your university?
Yeah, so it came very quickly and candidly, I don't think anybody was really expecting a lot of the things that came out of this, except a few of us. So I remember sitting at the end of February, toward the end of February, sitting in a health system board meeting. And in that board meeting, I had been informed by that point about what was likely to come. And my infectious disease division chair kept saying, you know, Dr. Rao, I think you've got to start telling people how disruptive this could be. I don't think people understand. He said, you're probably not going to be able to have basketball games. You might not be able to have gyms open. You might not be able to even hold classes. And are we all ready for this? And so I started talking about this in the board meeting. And I think everybody kind of looked at me like, huh? How could that be? And so it became obvious that, you know, this is not something that had happened in a very, very long time, and that we did need to start giving it some thought. It became clear, though, that once we got into March, the spread was unbelievably rapid and we needed to pivot very quickly. So we were one of the first institutions to decide very quickly that we needed to pivot, and that the pivot needed to be to safety and online. We have a very different student population than many other institutions in that we are proudly a majority minority student population. And a lot of our students are high needs. So we have about a third of our students who enjoy the opportunity to come to a major research university whose parents did not go to college. And many of these students are students who are very, very high need. So they are reliant on things like Pell Grants and resources that we are able to bring to the table from a financial aid perspective. But what we found is that with literally 1,500 of our students, they could not leave. So out of, you know, 6,000 or 7,000 who were living on campus, they said, we can't go home because this is our home. You know, we moved from where we were to VCU to start a new way of life. And this is now our home. So we had 1,500 who stayed on campus. And as President Price said, we also had many international students who had just, they weren't able to go anywhere. So they stayed on campus, and we were very happy to have them. It was a major challenge. We were guided by what we call our PHRT, or Public Health Response Team. Led by our administrators, but without question, all of the guidance that resulted in our decisions was coming predominantly from our infectious disease experts. We have about 12 or 13 of those folks. We also had the need for some pathology people because we were getting heavy into testing at that point. We knew we needed to know how to work through some of that, because although we're a healthcare system with a hospital that serves and outpatient clinics that serve 300,000 patients in a year, we knew that we'd need to be testing those folks too, along with our healthcare workers. And of course, we needed to have personal protective equipment as well for all of these folks who work at VCU, as well as others with patients, that is, and others who are not front facing with patients. And so, how do you start to build up all of these resources? So it was a real challenge, but we made it through with this great advice that we had from our experts. And I will say that unlike any place I can ever imagine being, we had tremendous compliance with safety measures that we put in place immediately. It really helped us to get through. We knew that we needed to keep some students on campus. We also knew that when we got into the fall, we would need to accommodate freshmen and sophomore students in particular because of the kinds of students who we have, but also remembering that one of the things that we learned in the spring, what we did in the spring of 2020, is we did a lot of what I'll call pulse surveying. So we know that students don't respond to big, long surveys, but if you pulse survey them and ask them one or two questions, they'll respond, even if it's with an emoji or something like that. And what we found is that our students were really struggling. And the biggest struggle that we picked up on was mental health. And so we have to remember that while whole health is absolutely important and we need to protect the vulnerable, whether they are the elderly or whether they are people who are vulnerable because of other diseases that they've had that created a compromise to their immune systems and therefore are really in potential harm's way with these diseases that came, with this disease that came along, the COVID disease that came from the SARS coronavirus 2. We also know that a lot of young people who are not as vulnerable had greater vulnerability with regard to what would happen to them mentally. Behaviorally. And so we planned our fall semester with a lot of that information that we had picked up. A lot of our students said things like, I can't just go and take a Zoom class at any time because, returning quote unquote home meant that I returned to, a very small apartment that is one bedroom with 3 or 4 of us in Northern Virginia. And I can't get quiet for a Zoom meeting with my professors or with my class. There were others who said, I don't have broadband access. How in the world can I possibly join a Zoom class? So we had notes in the president's email box that basically said things like, could you please tell my professor I cannot submit my paper online because I can't get online. All of the coffee shops that have the access are now shut down and they have shut down their Wi-Fi. And so I have to mail it in on paper once I can figure out how to get to a printer, by the way, which I also do not have. So there were equipment issues, there were challenges at home. A lot of students, as I mentioned earlier, found VCU to be their new home, their totally new pathway to transformation. And so it was a real challenge for them. The other thing, Jay, that we did, and Vincent did a great job of talking about this, VCU is not that different in this regard, is, we really had to think about how, as a major medical center with a research mission, how could we really contribute in a very rapid way to what was going on? And so we found that there were things like cancer drugs that we were doing trials with that we're actually curbing a lot of the symptoms that come from COVID-19 in a lot of our patients. They weren't helping with cancer, even though that was what we intended, but they were curbing a lot of those symptoms. And so we were, very involved in a lot of the drug trials that were out there, and very proud of that. We also did some simple things like, candidly, we were all running out of N95 masks, right? Remember that? And so we had an orthopedic surgeon who said, hey, why aren't we creating a UV room in which we can hang these masks, and then through UV light and some other ways of sanitizing these masks, make them usable again? So we all wrote our names on our masks and we got them back. And I trusted that they were certainly sanitized. Everybody else did too. I stayed in the mode of rounding. So I actually rounded quite a bit, even before vaccinations came along, in our medical respiratory ICUs, which, by the way, were so full, we actually had to open another floor. So we had 1.5, we went to 2, and then we went to 3. We had gigantic numbers of COVID positive patients and COVID positive employees. I will tell you, though, the COVID positive employees largely got it not on the healthcare campus, but they got it elsewhere and brought it in, unfortunately. But not to the detriment of our patients, because we had so many protocols that were in place with regard to our patients. But the worst thing that really happened with our patients is we are a cancer center. We are a cardiovascular center. We do implants of temporary hearts. We do transplants of hearts that are matched from a donor to a patient in need. There were way too many patients who did not come for their treatments, way too many patients who just got sick. And I have to tell you, unfortunately, way too many people who died. And this was not a situation that was happening just here as at VCU, which is the state's largest safety net. It was happening everywhere. It was happening at UCLA and many, many other places, because people perceived that hospitals were the last places you wanted to go. They were actually the best places to go, because we put these safety protocols in place very, very quickly. But it was an enormous challenge. But I have to say, we had one of the lowest positive COVID rates that you would find among our student and staff population in the country, because we had such great compliance, and frankly, because we had put so many measures in place that really made a lot of sense. And I have to credit my colleagues who really gave me all of the advice. My faculty colleagues could not have been more helpful. They made what we were able to achieve happen at VCU. In the midst of all this, I can't say thanks enough to the state and to the federal government for really stepping up and recognizing that as an access-oriented public research university, we truly were public, and it was critical that we made certain that we provided the kind of access that was necessary. We saw COVID disproportionately impact underrepresented people of color in particular, and of course, people who were really sick to begin with. And most of those folks, I hate to say, are disproportionately people of color as well. And so there was a tremendous step up from the state at a time, and the federal government at a time when we really needed them, and they came through. We will probably, as a result of what's gone on, have students leave with less debt than they've ever left VCU. And for that, I'm very, very grateful.
Okay, so we've, I think, set the stage. I think for a lot of people who are joining us tonight, it's not obvious that these institutions of higher learning had to deal with as much as we did have to deal with. But I think folks get a sense now of the breadth and the scope of the different challenges. But I want to come back to something, and I want to bring President Price back into the conversation as well, because now we can just have a conversation. And again, I encourage you guys to share questions if you have them via the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen. But you both talked about access. You both talked about students who maybe had to deal with more hurdles than others, right? So first, I just want to talk about infrastructure. Colleges and universities are literally built to serve students, right? The physical plant is so important. I heard, President Price was talking about the athletes and so on. And, all of their training facilities and everything are right there on campus. We have libraries on campus so that students have a third place that's not their dorm and not their classroom when they need a space to study or access to other information, right? What did you learn when essentially access to your physical space that had been built for a purpose was taken away from you, at least in terms of the way it was typically used for the better part of a year?
Well, a couple of things. One is we did try as best we could to activate as many spaces as we could. Differently, of course, with social distancing and a lot more restrictions surrounding how people could use it. But we did try to lean on those spaces. The other thing, obviously, we did in the remote setting was try to make available to students easy routes of accessing services that they would normally access on campus. And in the health system, we made a very dramatic shift to telemedicine and virtual delivery of patient care. And in both domains, actually, the uptake was very strong. And in some cases, we found that students and patients preferred it. For some of these, for access to advisors, for example, students actually like accessing that virtually. So it was a mixture. Because we had a distributed student population, particularly in the spring and over the summer, we leaned on different partnerships to provide access to mental health services and other kinds of health services for our students. As I mentioned, we did try to resolve technological access problems that students faced by shipping them hardware if necessary. Another thing we did is utilize the alumni community. As an example of this, we had over the summer the immediate loss to our students of all kinds of internship and study opportunities over the summer. So we put out a kind of APB to our alumni and our families, Duke families, and basically asked if they had any opportunities that they could create for these students. We asked our students to apply, and we did a match, and ended up matching at the end of the day between 400 and 500 students in virtual internship type encounters. Stood up a curriculum, a seminar program to support it. So it took a little bit of thinking about how you could still kind of lean on the bonds of community, even though they were stretched. You could still lean on those bonds of community to try to provide those services. But it was challenging, Jay, I have to say. The students adapted pretty readily. As I would walk around campus, I would see students in small groups. They'd be playing spike ball, or it was just a different kind of experience for the students. But they were very creative, and as Mike said, the faculty were very creative in coming up with alternatives and other means of support. So we're all ready to get back in the classroom. We're dying to have that typical college campus experience. But I have to say that for some, it worked out pretty well. A small example, we had a couple of Rhodes Scholars this year. I always reach out to them and have a conversation with them, and it's wonderful. And they reflect on their senior year experience at Duke, and one of them commented to me that when I asked about his class load, commented that all their classes were online. And I apologized. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. And he said, no, I love it. I prefer it. And I thought, okay, if it works for you, it works for us. The problem is it doesn't work for everybody. And I think what we've learned, what we take away from this is that we should leverage as many different modalities as possible, as many different points of entry as possible, become much more student-centric in our thinking, and provide students with alternative ways that they can meet their needs and that we can help them meet their needs. And I think this moment of crisis actually did, because it leans so much on innovation, accelerate that trajectory a bit.
President Rao, you look like you wanted to jump in.
Uh, no, I would just say that our story is very similar. There were many conversations that we had had about the advantages pre-pandemic of really connecting with folks who could benefit from a public research university, but really just were place-bound and couldn't get out of the situations that we were in. And by the way, a lot of them were actually in our rural health districts, trying to figure out how to deal with testing needs, and of course deal with vaccine needs later, vaccine distribution and such. But these are folks that are, really talented, but often don't have the kinds of, don't have the access they need to get the kinds of degrees and credentials that they want. But they got them because we were on, so much of what we were doing was online. It worked out really well for a lot of them. We also were able to accommodate more international students than we had previously because they were able to be online, and they were able to get more done than they would typically have gotten done. The thing that we also had to say is, as a university, if we're offering a degree that has stamped on it Virginia Commonwealth University, what does that mean? And how important is it that whatever you are taking, that you're able to say that the student has indeed mastered, if you will, the content of this course, or develop the skills that are necessary in order to, perform at a level that we might need once someone has passed the course, if you will. And so we started talking about the importance of digital multimedia content and ways to reach folks. And we had bigger, broader conversations about meeting students where they are instead of having them meet us where we are. The truth of the matter is that in higher education, I think it's only fair to be honest, even though it is taboo to say that many things have changed, but many things have not. There are many things that we are doing that are not dissimilar to what were the things that were being done 1,000 years ago at Cambridge and Oxford. Well, there are a lot of cultural implications with those things, right? And so, you were accommodating a relatively wealthy part of society. You were accommodating people who were of European orientation, and not necessarily really thinking about what we have said that higher education really needs to be, which is something that gives people access to the transformation of themselves, that enables them to be a part of, all of the things that so many human beings want in life that require economic access and, candidly, social access. So we've had some pretty serious conversations about that. And some people, of course, have been, kind of resistant to that, because I think people get stuck in their ways, especially if, some of us as faculty have been doing what we do for a long time. I think the future of higher education is about to change very, very dramatically, because students have made it clear that they want to see us change a whole lot more and meet them more where they are. And if we don't, then they are going to demonstrate their ability to look elsewhere. And I think you will see a lot of institutions rise to the level of need that our students have. I'm not just talking about financial need, I'm talking about engagement need, right? And so those institutions will succeed. Duke will probably be one of them. There are many, many others out there doing it. And so we will all have to be in a situation where we rise to that occasion. I'm very fortunate in that I can say that I have the most cooperative and supportive faculty of 2,600 that I think you could find any place. And they have been wonderfully engaged. We had 1,100 faculty members participate in what we called our boot camp. This was a boot camp that was really for our faculty members who were honest and said, yeah, we'll probably have to teach some junior and senior classes online, and I need some help. So, and this will probably end up helping us to put a number of other things online that would have taken years to get online. So, as Vincent said, I think this is, in many ways, you've got to take these difficult things that we face as human beings and turn them into opportunities. And really that's the importance of leadership. So, we say leadership is coping with change. Well, change can be really big, right? And so it's important for us to take these things and turn them into opportunities. You don't get all excited about bad things that happen, but when they happen and you can't control them, what do you do to bring more people to the table who couldn't have come before? And that's a lot of what came up in the last year and a half or so, is we've talked a lot about, look at how many people we say with our words we want to be a part of everything that we do, but they're really not, right? They're not getting access to healthcare. They're not getting access to, great institutions like these. And what do we need to do to open the door farther, or to do things differently so that when people look in through the door, they say, yeah, I can be a part of that. And I will feel like I am included as a part of that, not having to adapt to what all of these people have done for so many years in the past.
And I would just follow up on this last point Michael was making. We didn't just face a COVID pandemic. We faced twin pandemics, COVID, and then all of the social and economic fissures that COVID, exposed and widened, and those, particularly for higher education, have been, I think, probably even more profound in terms of the response it's called for from institutions like Duke. And so over the summer, for example, we spent a lot of time thinking through how we could become explicitly anti-racist as an institution, what it would take for us, what kinds of concrete steps. And so while we were working our way through the pandemic and the health protocols, every single one of our schools and units developed their own plan to advance along this anti-racist kind of pathway. And if you go to antiracism.duke.edu, you'll see compiled there a very comprehensive plan for the institution. It's not an initiative. I mean, this will take decades. It has to basically pervade every aspect of the way the organization operates, from the way we treat our staff to the way we recruit and retain faculty, the way we create access for students. For our health system, it's baked into their strategic plan to address community health disparities. It's infused in our commitments, broader commitments to equity and social justice. So that has been very profound. Also during this past year, our trustees spent a year in a university-wide task force that engaged trustees, faculty, staff, students, alumni around issues of climate change and sustainability, and how we could become, as an institution, the climate university. In effect, marry our research programs, our educational mission, and our operations as a university. And that took a lot of thinking too. I think in some ways, the pandemic has called on institutions of higher learning to address these crises, because we were confronted with one very, very real crisis that was readily apparent, that was infectious, that was killing our fellow citizens and sickening so many more of them. But through the lens of that crisis, we could look through and beyond and see these longer, much more systematic and much more insidious, and I would argue, dangerous kinds of crises, and mobilize to do those things. It's hard work, but I feel very proud of the way the institution stepped up, especially our students and our faculty, but our alums as well. And again, in some ways, the virtual world in which we were living facilitated some of those exchanges. It made some of them harder. But in other ways, it allowed us to fairly readily gather, large groups of people to walk through some of those issues, because they're very present and in need of serious attention from all of us.
So it's interesting because, for one, both of you inadvertently have answered some of the questions that were up in the Q&A section. But also, what you've laid out here, when we talk about the educational divide and really trying to make the full academic experience available to all of our students, you've identified a number of ways of kind of segmenting the student population that may not be the first thing to come to mind. The first thing I thought about when we were engaging in this conversation was what President Rao was talking about with respect to, we've got international students, they've got no place to go, or we have students who really use the university as their home, right? Or
Right.
we have students who, because they live in a particular area, right, which doesn't even necessarily have to do with socioeconomic status, don't have access to internet, right? Broadband internet. Um, how do we actually deliver a meaningful educational experience for those students? But you both now, between talking about mental health, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, social justice, have also now kind of cracked open this conversation around kind of, there are other ways to look at our populations and people who are at risk or needed even more support, not because of the physical infrastructure and whether or not that would allow them to engage with education, but because there were other factors that were made more salient and were more challenging for them in the environment we were in. And I think that's really a really interesting concept. Typically, when we have times of crisis, you see trends get accelerated. Trends that were already in place, we see them get accelerated. And I do think, I agree with both of you in the sense that this was an opportunity to think about or to rethink about how we deliver education and what we consider an educated person. And it certainly was an opportunity for us to think about the actual footprint of the university and our impact on the community around us, for sure. But I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit in the time that we have left about, you know, how you put the students and these students who may have had a particular aspect of their lives, backgrounds, other stakeholders, loved ones in their lives, right? That changed, their ability or impacted their ability to really enjoy and participate to the fullest extent in these universities. How did you put those students kind of at the center of this conversation and find ways to help them?
Yeah, I think Vincent talked a little bit about this as well, but we got into some fairly detailed conversations relative to anti-racism and the importance of, how what we say are our values needs to really play out in the context of what we're doing in our curriculum and in every other aspect of our existence as a university, whether it's in the context of research or whatever else. And so, Jay, in the research context, we have really decided that we're going to focus in 4 areas. And one, of course, is the human experience. We have the #1 ranked public school of the arts in the country. So it's an opportunity for us that's unusual and one that we are leveraging. Another is the human health, because we were, of course, founded as a medical school and a medical center, for that matter. We were a hospital back then as well, 183 years ago. And the other areas are really all around the environment, and we know that the environment's important because the environment um, has the potential in a negative context to impact people disproportionately who are lower socioeconomic, right? We know that happens. And then what we've tried to thread through all of this is a concept of social equality. We talk about these things, we teach people about these things, but to what extent can we show in our research that we actually impact these things in the work that we do? And so that doesn't necessarily always play well with, folks who think about research in a very narrow way. But it's changing. And I think this is more of what society wants to see from us. And it's certainly great modeling for our students who are at all levels, including undergraduate levels. So it's really important for us to model these things, to engage our students in this. And one of the things I've said is that you really can't graduate. I said this in 2016, that, you know, in a short time, every student coming in will have to have something other than 40 courses in order to graduate from VCU. You can't, you know, we're not going to make them take more. We're not going to make them do things outside of that 120 credit hours. But as part of that, we need to replace some part of that outside of the classroom so that students can get into a context in which what they're learning becomes sensible, makes a lot of sense to them, and gives them a chance to actually use what they've learned to help people who need help. And so the research agenda makes sense for that reason. We are talking about how to build anti-racism coursework into general education. So, you know, every school does have some responsibility here to engage in this, but we're also saying university-wide, we're going to do some things. It has been met with interesting responses from different people, including from within the university. But, you know, what is it that, so I've been a president for 27 years, and one of my writers said something to me about 10 years ago, and it really stuck with me. It was a line from Lyndon Johnson. He had come, my writer was from Texas, and he said, Lyndon Johnson often used to say, and don't worry, I'll leave the expletive out, you know, what's the presidency for? And I started to realize, well, geez, you know, I've been a president all this time. What is the presidency for? Well, sometimes it's to make people mad by doing the right thing. And I certainly have done a little bit more of that this year, but I think people respect that I'm doing it for the right reasons. We have to deal with this anti-racism need. It is just deplorable and sickening and really disgusting, some of the things that you've seen happen. You know, some of the things that have happened to Asian Americans and Asians, period, just wrong, absolutely wrong. They're just the wrong things, and we have to call those out as wrong. And if universities don't do that, and if universities don't integrate this conversation into what we're doing with all of our students, that's wrong. You know, to get out of here without being able to have those deep conversations and really require you to think. And if you've got a position, you know, that might be racist or might be ethnocentric or whatever, you need to be able to stand up and speak for it, and also listen to the other side of it, which you'll of course get more of in most of our places. And it's not because we're left or right. It's more because we are humanists and we want to embrace all human beings. That's really where we come from. I mean, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but I am absolutely for every human being given a chance to be successful. And it doesn't all start today because today we have a level playing field. You've got to deal with history. You've got to deal with all the things that make us as complex as we are as human beings. And this stuff happens all over the world. And if you can't count on our universities to have honest conversations about this, where can you look? I don't know where else you can look because everything else is so political.
And Jay, if I could just jump in and quickly say,
Please jump in.
you know, universities are problem-solving communities. We're organized around bringing together a wide range of perspectives and viewpoints across disciplines. We go out, we try to recruit diverse talent. We try to create these avenues for access to our universities and our programs. But I think what we're realizing is that partnership in problem solving is itself a liberal art that has to be practiced. It's also a very powerful pedagogical tool. And so what we're doing at Duke is looking at, particularly at the first year experience of our students. And as a research university, what we're trying to do is create as many opportunities for those students to get together around problems, to form teams, because a lot of this problem solving in the 21st century is very team-based, and create opportunities, you know, design labs in engineering, or we have projects that are built around bringing data analytic discipline to certain kinds of problems. And it's vertically integrated, undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, faculty. And what we're finding is that this is very powerful pedagogically. It's a kind of inclusion where everybody has a role to play. And once you're in that kind of a team setting, I think for students, it's just transformative. You actually retain, we're discovering that we retain more, for example, non-traditional engineers in engineering, if we start them out in that kind of an experience, than if you throw them into, introductory physics and chemistry and just take a bureaucratic approach. So this is a case where at our best, we think of ourselves as an open access problem-solving community. The final thing I'll say is we're good at solutions as a community, particularly as faculty. We're not always good at identifying the right problems. And that's where community partnerships can be so powerful. If you reach outside and you don't approach a community with solutions in hand, have we got a fix for you? That's not the approach. Just talk to us. What do you need? What are your problems and challenges? And bring that back and really work those through the resources that we have, the human resources we have. There's magic in that formula. And so whether it's the environment, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's economic inclusion, you name your problem. Universities can be a huge part of the solution, but the way to get there is through assembling teams, being very consciously problem focused and team based in our work. And I have great confidence that that's the wave of the future, and it's uniquely suited to research universities.
So you bring up a couple of interesting points that we haven't really gotten into up until this point. The role of the university in terms of bringing resources to bear to solve sticky problems. We are also, back in the days when I worked in tech, we used to talk about eating our own dog food. We are also these giant communities where we get to roll out certain new practices or model behavior for the rest of the community. And one of the things that struck me, President Rao was talking about the compliance when it came to masking, social distancing, and so on, and how successful that was, right? To have the stakeholders at the university actually modeling the behavior. Question to both of you, and this may be the last question, but it ties in two of the questions that we got in our Q&A, is, did you see examples of that or opportunities for that over the past year? And do you see any going forward when we talk about diversity and inclusion and potentially training or inclusion awareness, addressing certain behaviors, equity when it comes to microaggressions, stuff like that, or when it comes to the environment, either by, for example, adopting more electric vehicles in the fleet, or potentially divesting from companies that are not green, or whatever. Have you identified opportunities where the university, just kind of dealing with its own internal decision making, or is able to make positive strides in some of these areas that have become more clearly opportunities for us to make positive change over this past year?
Yeah, I would say that we this is a transformational time. There's no question about it. The human experience has changed in ways that really challenged us, but it's also changing in ways that has created a level of awareness that just has not been there. And, I mean, to be very blunt with you, there are a lot of wonderful things about higher education and the impact that we have had on society. But there are also some things that we need to really be looking in the mirror at ourselves about. There are a lot of things that we do, despite what we say, that are not, in my opinion, as inclusive as they could be. The ways in which we expect a lot of our work to be done in classrooms, the ways in which we look at research, and, candidly, even the diction that you find prevalent in a lot of our institutions. How does somebody feel when they haven't been around all of these great big words that we tend to use, and some of these ways in which we tend to interface and interact with each other? Yes, debate is healthy. Yes, debate is an important part of what we do. But how do you do that without intimidating people who have not been a part of debate before, right? And we just have to, I think, we've got to go forward thinking very differently than we have in the past. I do think that higher education will change in many, many different ways. We are doing a whole lot more training. We're actually doing what we were actually created something called a leadership certificate. And it's really not about leadership per se in a general way. It's a certificate that requires all of our employees to do a lot of training, if you will, around unconscious bias. There's a lot of it. If you look at our faculty and our faculty and our staff populations compared to our student populations, there is a need to pay attention to how different they are. You know, we're a majority minority student population, but we are not a majority minority faculty population or staff population. And so a lot of the things that people have done and do are not in keeping with meeting students where they are today. The other thing that I heard you say, Jay, that I think is important is universities, we really need to stay more connected to our communities as whole bodies. Lots of opportunities for us to engage with our communities, particularly those in need. You know, we do a little more of that in the medical center because, you know, we see things in emergency rooms. We see major trauma come through. You know, we see patients who come with, you know, tremendous comorbidities that are very, very complicated, rare conditions and those sorts of things. They result in coming to us ultimately because no other medical center knew what to do. And maybe we saved their lives, but that shouldn't be the only way that we're really interacting. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, I'm so proud of my trauma surgeons, because they've actually provided leadership in our communities that focuses less on trauma surgery and more on preventing it. So they're deeply engaged in our communities talking about gun violence prevention, frankly. And, you know, public health approaches that really work with gun violence prevention, working in schools in the area and such. So I think the impact can be great. I think it can certainly be greater. We are, as universities, going to have to figure out how to move a whole lot faster than we have. And I'm not just talking about VCU, I'm talking about all of us. And so I guess I shouldn't end with a few warts, but the truth is that the power that we have to be transformative in society is tremendous. But we're all going to have, you know, the debate and such that we have, but we're also going to have to move a whole lot faster than we have. And that's going to take some courage, and it probably requires a new generation of leaders that, you know, are going to take some heat in higher education in order to see some of that change come to reality.
President Price, you get the last word.
Well, I'll try to be brief. Universities are fundamentally, I like to say, we are in the human talent identification and development business. I mean, that's what we do. And we have to be expansive in our view of where that talent is and recognize that it is right before our eyes. It's not hidden. It's that we don't see it. We don't choose to see it. If we're smart, if we want to increase the talent we bring to our campuses and then send, you know, out into the world to do good work, the smart thing to do is to be much more open-minded about who we invite in, and that's really the access challenge. And then the development challenge is to take every single person we work with, whether they're we haven't talked about staff, but there are so many staff members who work at so many universities who are almost invisible to our faculty and our students oftentimes. We need to recognize the depth of human talent and opportunity in every single person who comes to our campuses, including, I would say, especially our staff oftentimes. And if we just keep that in mind, then the question you posed, Jay, is how do we bring people to the table? It will happen. If we open our ears as much as we open our mouths, a lot of things would improve in the world. And that's what it comes down to at the end. It sounds simple. It's simpler to say than it is to do in a large, complex research university. But as leaders, I think we have to continually push ourselves to do that and push our communities to do that more effectively.
This has been an amazing conversation. Both of you are inspirational, and it's been a great journey just listening to you talk about some of the nuances of leadership in these institutions and some of the opportunities that we have going forward to make them even better and better experiences for the students. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today and your time. With that, I'm going to thank our participants as well and hand it over to Anjali from the Asian Society of Southern California to take us home.
Thank you very much, Jay. And thank you to our speakers, President Rao and President Price. I'm Anjali Sharon, Associate Director for Asia Society Southern California. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our promotional partners. These include Asia Society Center for Global Education, Duke Stanford School of Public Policy, Heart of Los Angeles, Howard University, Nambia, Virginia Commonwealth University, UCLA NEAMS, UCLA Luskin, and USC Rossier. I'd also like to thank again the Los Angeles Urban League for partnering with us on this program, and to encourage all of you watching to consider becoming a member or making a donation. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do these kind of programs. And speaking of programs, the next is Asia Society at the Movies. We'll be featuring the film Swimming Out Till the Sea Turns Blue on June the 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, a conversation with the director, Zhang Ka, moderated by Michael Berry. We look forward to seeing you at a program soon, and thank you again. Good night.